Cool.
Okay.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we have a round two from the show we did last week. If you haven't seen that, I'll put a link to that in the description later, so you can go and check that out too. This is basically, it's my friend Scipher who had a conversation with a Christian on Twitter, and that led to these conversations. The last one, I think, was pretty cordial and pretty interesting, so if you want to go and check that out, feel free to do so. For now, let's welcome our guests back. Scipher, Craig, how are you guys doing today?
Well,
I'm doing great, thanks.
Okay. Well, you basically said you were going to talk more about science and where you stand on that position. So I'll just hop out and I'll leave the floor to you guys.
alrighty. Well, did you have something specific, Cypher, you want to talk about?
No, just kind of what you think science is and how it works. Because I think this kind of goes to the crux of, our discussion about creationism and the claims it makes compared to the different fields of science and how they kind of explain the world around us.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm a very huge supporter and believer in science, all kinds of science. But at the same time, science doesn't get everything correct. So, and as you know, I think even the scientists say that, things change as more ideas come in. They can change, not more ideas, but more data. And then also, even among scientists, especially when new data comes out, my understanding, it takes them a long time to shift to another way of thinking. So, yeah. And I could go into different ideas that I think are maybe pertinent to this conversation, like diet, for instance. You might be aware that the cereal companies made our diet up with a cereal pyramid, back in the, I think, late 50s in that area. So I was raised thinking that, cereal's the best thing you can eat. Well, now they've kind of flipped it over, and there's a lot of different, scientists that say, no, that's actually wrong. So I'm just saying that, and that's probably true with almost every science, that things just, they believe it for a while, and then once a consensus is taken, then it may take other scientists a long time to jump on board, but they finally do, usually, and maybe they don't. It depends on the situation. So, but no, I believe in science big time, because science, to me, is where you're looking at data, you record it, you know how to repeat it, and you can see that that's the same outcome every time. So that's probably that's the science. That's correct.
So the common claim that, science has to be repeatable and observable. And repeatable is kind of like one of those weird things where I think a lot of people don't understand how it's actually used in science. Like we were talking last week about the fact that you have Neil Shubin who, made a hypothesis that we should be able to find a certain transitional fossil in a certain area if we look for the right kind of rocks at the right time period. And of course, they have to be exposed so we know they're on the surface so we don't have to dig for them. And that's why we look in certain places. So repeatable means that he repeated that. He said, yeah, if we find certain organisms here that have this transition that's close to the one that we are expecting to find, then if we want to find another transitional type form, we should look in another area with similar types of rocks. So that means it's repeatable. It doesn't mean you have to do it in a lab. So that's kind of one big thing. But going back to kind of what you introduced there as well, science does change over time, because that's what happens is that we get new data, we gather new data, and then we try to explain it in some way. And I think the main point there being, pretty much all the things that have been accepted for decades, if not centuries, don't change that much. They change just a very little amount. So this kind of goes back to us getting back to talking about creationism, which is, you're a young Earth creationist, so it's basically flood geology. That's where it started. We talked about last time how it started in the 1960s through Seventh-day Adventism and George McCready Price, and then of course Whitcomb and Morris in their book The Genesis Flood in the early 1960s. But I think the route I'm going here is that science does change. It has to. It always does when we have new data. It doesn't change that much once you have a pretty well established concept, a model, which you can make predictions off of and test new data that's coming in. Instead it solidifies. There are outliers every once in a while, but overall not. So this gets to kind of the creationism discussion we were having last time, and how science also works through the idea of consensus between fields that are completely different. So if you're going to make the claim that, which you have, there was a worldwide flood about 4,400 years ago. The one thing I see creationists always doing is this thing called cherry picking, where they basically just take one set of data completely independent from everything else and say, look, this one piece seems a little bit anomalous, or it doesn't seem to fit in some way. Here's what we think is happening to make it fit the model that we have, which is the Noachian flood happening, a certain number of thousand years ago. So they cherry pick this one piece of data, and then they, have people kind of discuss that, and then they introduce another piece of data. And that other piece of data really doesn't go along with anything they were saying before, and usually it doesn't have anything to do with it. And they say, look, here's another piece of data that seems to be a little bit, not fitting your current models, but we think fits ours in some way. And where I'm going with this is that when you are looking at something, say like a really broad scientific explanation, being the age of the Earth being 4.5 billion years old, approximately, and going through all these different geological and biological changes over time, and ecological changes, and other types of changes, what you see is that every field of science agrees with that in some way. And they are taking data from completely different, points of gather. Like if you're looking at physics, they're looking at maybe, and I'm going to just be kind of really general to the conversation, try to point out some stuff that happens in these conversations a lot. Physics uses radiometric dating, and geology uses a lot of superposition. And how we know through geochemistry, combining chemistry and geology, how we know that certain rock layers form at certain rates, and that lithification of rocks is not something that instantaneously happens. It is because molecules, and then we're getting back into physics and chemistry again, molecules move throughout the sediments or whatever has been laid down and turn them into a hard structure we know as rock, instead of just being small pieces of dirt and minerals and whatever else that have gathered together. Even organisms, which is why we have fossils. And then, going into fossils and biology, you have, this consensus that it takes a certain amount of time for these things to happen. As far as fossilization goes, which goes back to chemistry and physics and geology. So I hope you're seeing what I'm trying to point out here is that all of these different fields gather research independent of one another, but they all come up with the same explanation. The broadest part of it being the Earth is 4.5 billion years and evolution has happened over a certain amount of Earth's history. So, yes, we keep updating with new evidence. We keep changing our concepts, but they don't change as much as they used to when these fields of science were new. They're very, most of these concepts are just irrefutable at this point. So I'm wondering if your argument against evolution, against the older Earth, against science in general, because you are really attacking all fields of science when you say evolution is wrong. I wonder if it's not scientific, if it's actually theological. Like, do you have a theological reason for not accepting the old age of the Earth and evolution happening over billions of years?
Well, so would you agree that, go back to the cereal idea that I mentioned earlier and the food pyramid, would you agree that that was persuaded by the cereal companies like Kellogg's and Big G and all that? Would you
So you
think that
you appear to be trying to make an argument that the reason that we accept the old age of the Earth and evolution is because there's money involved and somehow that influences government policy?
well, I think that's probably true, but it can be, of course. Um,
But so you're saying there's a worldwide conspiracy among scientists to trick their governments into, I don't know, paying them money so that people accept evolution happened and the Earth is billions of years old,
so
and the Noachian flood didn't happen approximately 4,000 years ago. That kind of seems to
so
be what you're saying. I'm just trying to confirm that is that what you're saying, or are you saying that again there's this worldwide conspiracy among scientists,
well, before
and governments are in collusion with the scientists to somehow fool the general population? Because it seems like that's what you're saying. That's why I'm asking.
so if you don't mind backing up and answer the question that I gave you, if you don't mind. So
About
do you,
cereals
do you
and the food and the food pyramid and how we should have certain amounts of different nutrients every day from different food groups?
know the original food pyramid had cereal at the bottom, and that was like a third of your food, or even more, should come from grains.
So
That was
what's
the
your point?
original one back in the 60s and 70s,
So you're saying
and they
that the cereal company somehow influenced the government, paid them off to make sure that they were selling more product.
that's pretty much a fact.
So my original question then stands about there being a worldwide conspiracy, because that's what you're saying now. Again,
No, I'm not saying. Well, answer my question.
I just did.
So you're saying that that was not a conspiracy, that the food companies
No, I'm
had people
saying, well, first of
and
all,
the food companies
it's
set up
not
everything.
analogous with science, the age of the Earth, and
That's not my point. I mean, you're not admitting that that could be true, what I just said.
well, it really doesn't have any weight on what we're trying to discuss, and it's a bad analogy
Sure
to
it
say
does.
the
It
least.
most certainly does. It 100% does.
So again, you're saying that there's a worldwide conspiracy among science and government to make people believe the Earth is billions of years old, evolution happened, and the Noachian flood didn't happen 4,400 years ago. We're kind of going in a circle because you just
I
said
don't
that you were using that as like an example to show how evolution didn't happen
but I'm
because
just asking
somehow
you.
it happened with cereal companies. No, because somehow it
I know. I'm
happened with
asking.
cereal companies 50 years ago. That's your syllogism there. That's the flow of your argument. You're saying this happened in a cereal company, so it must happen in evolution and the age of the Earth and the flood not happening.
So did it
That's
happen or
your
not?
that's
That's my question. Did it happen
well,
or
it
not?
doesn't. If it did, it doesn't pertain to our discussion.
Sure it does.
Unless you were saying that there's a worldwide conspiracy among scientists to say that evolution happened and the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. That's
Yeah,
the only way
I'm just
those
going
two
to
things
assume.
tie together.
Okay. Whoa.
It is.
Hello.
It is really the only way those two things can tie together in what we're
No.
discussing right now.
So, all right. So let me answer this then. So,
Yeah, you
if
seem
what
to be wanting to go somewhere with this, so please explain.
I'm trying to,
I'm interested to hear how you think those two things tie together.
okay. Well, so if it's true what I said, but you won't admit to it. I mean, you think it's not part of the conversation, but I do. But I don't know why
Well,
you won't say. Yeah,
I'm
that could be,
trying to just understand why you were including it as
that,
part of the conversation.
but why can't you answer the question? I mean,
Well,
what's your reasoning for that? I don't want to get hooked
because my no, I don't want to get hooked on you. I want to understand why you were introducing it as part of the conversation. What do these two things have in common? One of these things is not like the
So
other. I'm not sure.
if sorry, so
No.
if I give you a good reason why, will you then admit that possibly that's what happened back in the '60s? That they had
Well,
people on the board.
I'm not denying that's what happened. I'm trying to
Okay.
understand why you were bringing this up in context to our conversation.
All right, I'll tell you why. So I was raised because of what they said, which now has been proven false, and because they had people on the board from these cereal companies. I was raised thinking, man, I should eat all the cereal I can because that's good for me. And a lot of people were. And now, you know, over here, cereal is good for you, or not anymore, but it was. And now they've changed it. And like donuts were good for you because they had, all these different things that we thought were good for us have now been turned upside down. And we're finding out that actually more protein is better for you. I mean, even beef now, there's a lot of people now that are into this beef only meat. So I mean, I'm just saying these are scientists that tell us this information, and now this stuff is being turned around by many people. It's not just a few, but there's a lot of doctors, family doctors that are
So
saying now
again,
that.
what does that have to do with the Earth being 4.5 billion years old and evolution happening over a certain amount of time? And
I'll tell you.
how is it an argument for a Noachian flood about 4,400 years ago? I do not see the connection.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to get you to explain, because you were saying that because industry scientists were trying to promote their product and were paying off the government to do so,
Well, I don't know if they're paying them
that
off.
somehow relates to our conversation about science in general, evolution, the Noachian flood, the age of the Earth. I'm not
I'll
seeing
tell
the
you.
connection because
So
we're not talking about industry scientists, promoting smoking to doctors, to get their patients to smoke because it's going to be healthier for them. Well, those are industry scientists saying that. That is your argument. How does that relate to you trying to say somehow that relates to the entire population of the Earth? I should say, all the scientists around the world are somehow in a big conspiracy to say evolution happened and the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Because that's the
okay.
only two ways you can tie why you're
No,
even bringing up this claim to what we're trying to discuss.
no, I disagree with your hypothesis there, or if that's what you call it. Um, so to answer your question, the when scientists look at things from one direction, that's what they find. Just like the cereal things. For years, they kept saying how good these cereal. I mean, different scientists, nutritionists, they were saying
Okay,
this is what's good.
we have the idea about the cereals. Just try to
But you're
please
not getting it.
explain what
But
this
let me
has to
finish.
do with our conversation.
I'll tell you. So
Because
let
I
me finish.
don't understand why you keep harping on this point, kind of beating the dead horse. I'm
No,
not
no,
sure
but
what
please,
this is trying to do. Yeah, please, yeah.
please let me finish. So I'll get there. So, so the point is that you had all these scientists, nutritionists, everybody up until, I don't know, 20 years ago, 100%. The food pyramid was absolutely correct. Every scientist, everybody you're talking about that have that have studied this nutrition, all this stuff, they all said up until 20 years ago, that's the main way to eat. That's how you do it. And now, but we know why, because that's the science they were looking at were from that direction. They looked at it from the cereal standpoint and said, yeah, this is the way to eat. Low fat. That's another one. Eat low fat, and it's what's going to make you heal. The low fat diet. Well, that's changed now, because now the scientists are looking in a different direction, and so now these scientists are saying, maybe that low fat diet's not as good as we thought it was. Okay, so since that was kind of pushed on everybody back in the 60s with the food pyramid, all through school, just like the school taught me evolution, they taught me to eat from the food pyramid. And I love my school teachers, but I don't think they were doing it to be mean or any of all that stuff, but that's what they taught us. And now we find out they were wrong. So, right now cereal's the cheapest thing you can buy, and there's a lot of fat people that live on cereal. So again, that is science. That science taught them that. So if science is looking only from one direction, that's all they see. So when it gets to evolution, scientists are looking at it from the viewpoint of Darwin, because Darwin is the only possible way that could have happened. So that's the way they look at their data, is that way. Now, if you look at the data from the creation scientists, and there's a lot of them. There may be more of the other side, but there again, how long they've been trying to get people to understand that eating fat is good for you? That's been going on for a long time, and there's still people that will not even touch fat. Low fat diet, that's still fat. All they do is get fatter. So, So the point is that when you look at data from one direction, that's the way you're going to see it. And unless you can see it from both sides, that's where you're at. You only see it from one side. Just like I'm just going to say this from what I just saw, and this is just the way I see it. And of course I could be wrong, but the way you would not admit that could have happened. It was hard to get you to say that the food pyramid was done wrong and pushed on us by the big cereal companies. You didn't want to admit that.
Actually, I said exactly that. I said that because scientists, no, I said it at the beginning. I said because industry scientists pay the government, you were trying to jump and make the conclusion that that's what's happening with scientists worldwide about evolution in the age of the Earth. I said that in the beginning. So I said that, that because, some scientists are colluding with the government, that has no relevance to the discussion we're having unless you are trying to make the leap, which apparently you are, that there's a worldwide conspiracy to push evolution and the old age of the Earth. And you kind of just admitted that. Also, I don't, again, the reason I brought up what I did when we began about basically all these disparate fields of science, meaning they're all different. They gather evidence and data from completely different pieces of information. They aren't talking about the same thing. They're all gathering it from different information. Yet all of this data shows that evolution has happened over billions of years and the Earth is billions of years old. It doesn't really have anything to do with Darwin at all. Darwin just came up with a concept. Well, a few. He's most well known for natural selection. He had a whole bunch of other concepts that are still used today. And it doesn't really matter what he said. It matters that we can actually show that his hypothesis has been tested in some way, and it's either been rejected or not rejected. They're never accepted. That's something I go over with my students all the time. Hypotheses are never rejected. You either reject the hypotheses you made because you make multiple ones when you're trying to test something, when you're asking that question, or you don't reject them and then you say, okay, that's interesting. Why did I reject these? Why didn't I reject those? Darwin really has nothing to do with evolution anymore besides, again, his central concept. I know that, you keep saying back in my day, this is how we were taught. Well, we need to kind of move beyond back in my day. And if you want to look at the history of how this happened, It wasn't just Darwin. It was a whole bunch of people before him. It was people after him who continue to make new discoveries. And again, all these discoveries are from different fields. We can look at linguistics, we can look at psychology, we can look at paleontology, genetics, geochemistry, we can look at, physics and the decay rates of certain elements. They are all consilient with one another. They all take evidence from, again, different fields, disparate fields, yet they all agree with one another in the general consensus that we are trying to discuss, which is the idea of the age of the Earth, evolution happening over time, or a 6-day creation event with a Noachian flood about 4,400 years ago. Because that's kind of why I started out the conversation the way I did. I'm trying to understand if you think that science is just basically bunk unless you have someone looking at it from a theological point of view and saying that this is we're trying to get the Bible to match the evidence instead of we're trying to look at the evidence and see what conclusions we can come to based off the evidence alone.
Well, again, I would say that most scientists are looking at things from the Darwinian point of view.
Well, but
Then
I just was saying they aren't even, no one really cares about that.
Sure they do.
I mean, unless you're studying a specific claim that Darwin made, no one cares. They're just taking in the evidence and they're saying this is what we see happening. This is our explanation for what happened in the past. This is our explanation for what's happening now. This is our explanation of what's going to happen in the future based off of certain predictions of the evidence, based off the evidence we have. Again, Darwin doesn't have anything to do with this at all. The age of the Earth has nothing to do with Darwin. The fact that in the fossil record we see a certain progression has nothing to do with Darwin. It just is.
Well, just remember, for 40 years, that food pyramid was the way
It
it
has
was.
nothing to do with our conversation.
And all they try to do, all the scientists.
It really doesn't have anything to do with our conversation.
It sure does.
Unless again, you're saying there's a worldwide conspiracy among scientists.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that.
Okay, but
what I'm saying is, but if you look at things from one direction, that's what you're going to see. That's all I'm saying. All those
and you're
scientists.
saying that direction, but you're saying that direction is that everyone is trying to prove that Darwin was right, kind of, is what you appear to be saying. Or they are all basing it off the fact that Darwin was right.
Well,
when again, evolution nowadays really doesn't have anything to do with Darwin. Pretty much at all.
Well, so
it's gone way beyond him.
Again, when I was in school, they taught only evolution, so that's all I believed.
No, they didn't. They taught you science, and part of what they taught you was evolution.
Right.
And that specifically probably only happened in maybe a geology class, very, infrequently, especially in high school and junior high, because I don't know if you ever took it in college. In a biology class, especially the time that you were in biology in high school, evolution was hardly even a topic. It was very low down on the list. You were learning about the Krebs cycle, you were learning about different kingdoms of life, you're learning about ecology. Like I said, I have some books from the 1950s, some high school science books in my collection which I could dig out. They really don't discuss evolution.
Well, okay, but I mean, our teacher still taught it to us. Oh, by the way, I went to my friend who lives here in town with me, and we went to school together from the 7th grade till end of high school, and then we became friends later. And I asked him, "What were you taught in school about evolution?" It was almost, he said the same words verbatim what I said. So, and again, I'm not the best student.
They probably taught you that for like 2 or 3 days.
Huh?
They probably taught you that for like 2 or 3 days throughout the school year, right? So they really didn't teach you evolution. They just gave you a very simple explanation of what it was.
Sure. And showed us pictures of the chimpanzee all the way to the human, that's how it happened. And
we discussed that last week, that's a chick track. That's a chick track that you were talking about. That is not what evolution says happened. Yeah.
He said the same thing. They showed like an anteater that turned into a horse, and I don't know. He said a couple things. So I don't know. I learned it. I don't know why I would have learned that thing wrong, because to me that was important to kind of know where we came from. Although I didn't, go into science later on, but But I don't know, he said the same thing, so I don't know what to say.
That
So
you're taking a very incomplete view of what the field is, and you're just denying it outright based off of um, your very bad education 50 years ago. Is
okay,
that's
fair
what
enough.
you appear to be saying? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I'll
I'm
go with
sorry that
that.
happened to you. I'm sorry you had such a bad education. You never looked into the topic more deeply. I hope you do
So
so in the
before I
future.
so if I would have looked into it more deeply, I might have come to the same conclusion you just did because I was taught that and only that and deeply into it. Um, and so I mean, once you're taught something for a long time, boy, it's hard to let go. It's real hard to let go. You got to know that. So
Well,
once your mind,
it's why we have the propaganda technique known as the big lie, which is resurfacing here in the United States. But of course, Goebbels was one who really had a good time with it.
okay. So I don't know what the big lie is, but
Well, the big lie is basically you tell a lie over and over and over again until people
no,
believe it.
right, right,
And you just
and
keep
that could be
repeating the lie, and at some point, people are just going to say, "Oh, that's the truth. That's not a lie." We all accept that
right.
because we've always been told that.
And I agree with that, 100%. I what you just said, I totally agree with. By the way, so
But
but
science doesn't do that.
sure
Because
does.
again, you no, because again,
It sure
you're
does.
looking, you are having independent fields of science looking at different evidence, yet coming to the same conclusion. That should be impossible. It's not a lie because they're not even conferring with one another. Again, unless you were saying there's a worldwide conspiracy.
No,
That's the
but what I'm
only
saying,
explanation as to again why you would bring up, you know, industry people in cereals colluding with the government to build the food pyramid. That's that's the only way you can link those two threads that I see.
well,
So
it's a true
so it's
story.
interesting.
Either way,
You know,
it's true.
I found
So
it really telling that you said that at the beginning. So that's why I keep coming back to it because it seems to be that's yeah, that's the only explanation for why
so I
you brought
think
up
we
that
can.
subject in the first place.
So let's just summarize this real quick.
Yeah.
You're saying that because there's so many different um, sciences out there, and they never talk to each other, and none of them believe in evolution, that
They
they
don't
all come to the
have
same conclusion that
they're
they
not starting with the premise of evolution.
okay, all right. Well, I'm saying that that may not be true because I don't know who wasn't taught evolution as a child. I bet you $1 you learned that as a young child, but you might have been more interested in science, so you jumped in it and read every book and got indoctrinated, easily. That could have happened to you. So I mean, just like a religious people, these flat earthers, holy cow! That that friend of mine's son, I talked to him about that flat Earth stuff. I was flabbergasted. I can't even believe he thinks that way. So, um, so when you're taught this evolution stuff, you can't see anything else. I mean, especially since we are taught that in every public school, and you got to admit that we are taught every public school that way. So after I saw that chick, what'd you call it again? The evolution thing. What was that called? About
Oh,
the
the
monkeys
chick
and all.
track.
Yeah, but what was the name of the
Big
track?
Daddy was the name of the chick
Big
track.
Daddy. Perfect. So when I saw Big Daddy, all that did was open my eyes to, that is weird. I mean, how could there be two or three of these things that were I was taught
But
in
last
fifth
week we
grade?
just
But
explained that Big Daddy is
no,
completely fictitious and based off of lies.
no,
The
it's not.
representations are not true. And it's propaganda. And it's
No.
basically what it comes down to it's what pretty much all of creationism is, which is hucksterism, which
Okay.
is why,
Well,
you have Ken Ham building his art park. It's pure hucksterism. It's nothing but a way to make money off of gullible people.
okay. I could say the
There's
same thing about
there's
you. You said exactly the same thing about me.
there's one born every minute and two to take them. But I'm again, I come back to the point that you could say that about me, but what you're basically saying is that again, there's this worldwide conspiracy to promote evolution and the old age of the earth among scientists, a conspiracy worldwide to do this. For what reason? I mean, what reason would they have to do that
Well,
and to not accept um, a young Earth creationist view of a 6,000-year-old Earth and a 4,400-year-old flood? Like, what is Why one and not the other? Because that's, you appear to be making this false dichotomy and saying that it's either a 6,000-year-old Earth, a 4,400-year-old Noachian flood, and all the sediments were laid down at or after that flood, and then all the volcanoes, and mountains appeared on top of that after the flood, after the sediments had somehow lithified within, what, 100 years, 50 years, so that everyone could walk across the surface of the earth without sinking into mud. Um, that's why I'm trying to, and you're saying that that's what happened instead of our current understanding of science, which, various fields of science, almost all of them, worldwide, independently doing their own research, agree upon a similar answer. Unless there's a worldwide conspiracy. And companies are behind it. Cereal companies are doing it so that we can have a food pyramid and they can make money off of selling Raisin Bran. I'm sorry to be facetious, but I'm trying to understand, again, why one and not the other? Why the false dichotomy between your young Earth creationism and science?
Well, I don't think there is. I mean, you keep saying that as if it's fact, and I'm not sure it's fact. I mean, you're looking from your world point of view that you were taught since you were a kid that you could never give up. I mean, you just can't. I don't. If I took you back and was able to have you on Noah's boat, you still might not believe it. So, but the point is, I mean, and I said this the last time, evolution scientists, they have a whole lot of information.
Are
And
paleontologists evolution scientists because they accept the fossil
sure,
record?
sure they are.
Okay,
They both.
are
You can have
are
paleontologists that are creation scientists and evolutionists, both sides.
okay. Well, at some point, hopefully, you introduce a paleontologist who is a young Earth creationist, and we'll take a look at his data. Are you saying that geophysicists who know where to dig for oil and coal based off of fossil information, that they are evolution scientists or evolutionists or whatever you want to call them?
Um, I wouldn't. I don't know if that makes a difference either way. Why
But
would that
yet
make a difference?
geophysicists drilling for coal, oil, and gas are doing so based off of our understanding that those deposits were laid down due to evolutionary processes. Right? They
Or
they're basically
or
saying,
no,
yeah, we should look for the coal and oil here because it doesn't have anything to do with the flood at all. It has to do with the fact that you find certain time periods where there's a lot of life being produced in certain areas, then that leads to something that fossilizes and we call fossil fuels, and then we dig up as coal, oil, gas, and stuff.
okay. So I don't think you've seen this yet, but you've heard of Kurt Wise, right? Dr.
Oh
Kurt
yeah,
Wise.
yeah.
Okay.
And
So
I have seen the video you sent me about him. Yeah.
he just put out a new one that I just found. It's called "What Happened When
Well,
Mount St. Helens Erupted." Have you
and
seen
I
that
told
one?
you that I actually watched Mount St. Helens erupt last week, right?
Yeah.
I was there. I was living in Portland, Oregon. Yeah, I watched it erupt. I was in third grade. You know, and I went to a couple different creation museums, especially when I was in college, going between the Seattle area and the Portland area. There was a couple set up there because it's right along the route, right? It's about halfway in between it, actually. There are a couple creation museums set up there. I've been to many. I've heard their arguments. Um, and the interesting thing about Kurt Wise, I'm pretty sure he's one along with Steve Austin, is how he pretends to be a scientist. He actually writes in reputable publications. And he writes work that basically disputes his young Earth creationist claims, but then he makes these young Earth creationist claims basically to promote, again, this hucksterism of young Earth creationism so he can sell videos and books and stuff like that. As far as his claims about Mount St. Helens, I don't know why everyone's fixated on Mount St. Helens necessarily, because there's an entire mountain range that goes from Mount Shasta all the way up into British Columbia. So from, Northern California all the way up into Canada. And that's the entire Cascade Mountain range. And there are many volcanoes. It's just that that one happened to erupt within our lifetime spectacularly. Some of them have had eruptions, they just haven't been that dramatic. And we do have evidence of eruptions like that happening in the past. And we know why it happened. We know why there are these explosive rhyolite volcanic eruptions. And that rhyolite is just a certain type of magma that's formed in a certain way. And it's because you have this subduction zone, against the continental plate where you have an oceanic plate subducting underneath, and it brings down lots of volatiles and water and other things, and it makes the magma explosive when it builds up in a certain way. And one of the most famous examples of that is Crater Lake. I actually grew up right next to Crater Lake in first and second grade in Klamath Falls. And Crater Lake exploded, Mount Mazama. But it exploded before your supposed Noachian flood even occurred. And again, all of these volcanoes are laying on top of sediments which you say were laid down by your Noachian flood 4,400 years ago. So all of these volcanoes somehow must have formed in the last 4,400 years. This is why I was trying to point out how all fields of science are consilient. They are using different data, yet they're coming to a very similar or the same answer in many ways on the subject of the age of the Earth and evolution actually happening. And I always say that, young Earth creationism is self-refuting and internally inconsistent. Because when you compare one claim, it refutes another claim. When you compare the claim of all the sediments were laid down by the Noachian flood with, Mount St. Helens produced coal in Spirit Lake because of bark sloughing off trees, which isn't what's happening, but that's, one of the arguments I've seen many times, heard many times. That's not what's happening. And that's not what we see as far as the coal that we dig up from the Carboniferous. Again, so these creationist claims, internally inconsistent, self-refuting. They don't even really attack the real claims that science is making about the formation of coal, about how sediments are laid down, about volcanic mountain ranges with subduction zones, about, how you sent me a video basically saying that Pangaea was the continent that existed before the Noachian flood, and the continents drifted apart at this incredible rate of speed. All of your claims have to somehow match up with one another, but none of them do. They can be thrown out there independently as a way to, again, build the straw man, have this, idea that you think is going to point out one small, misconception or consistency you see with the age of the Earth or evolution occurring. But again, if you take them all together, they really don't even match each other. They refute each other. So,
okay, let me ask you a quick
going
question.
back to, again, the disparate and consilient information that science has.
Okay, so you spent a little bit of time there talking about
Yeah.
huckster. I suppose that's not a term, I'm sure, but that's like saying you're Huckleberry Hound and you're saying something. Is that what that means? Being a huckster?
A huckster? No. A huckster means you're making money off of an idea that's pretty much known to be a sham.
Okay, well, science makes all kinds of money from the government, and you know that. But anyway, I don't want to talk about that really. So,
Because that would go back to your conspiracy theory about there being basically conspiracy worldwide about science.
what's the difference? What's the difference? I mean, I don't want to get on that subject because it's circular. But I mean, what you're saying could happen the other way too. I mean, you're saying that these creationists are making money. Well, who in the world do you think scientists aren't making money from the government? Holy cow! I mean, you got to be in a dreamland not thinking that. So, but anyway, I don't want to go there. So,
Guys, if I
To make
can
coal.
interrupt real quick, because there's a
Sure.
question in chat related to
Perfect,
this
yes.
actually. So Tear Your Hair Out asks, can you please ask why Craig interprets a changed and improved understanding of our reality as an indication that we cannot trust scientists? Why is more info bad? I think that's relating to
no.
the example you gave when they changed their views on cereal.
Okay. No, I'm not. No. What I'm saying is, as we learn new information, we change. But if our information comes from one direction, that's the way we believe, and then everything we do, we point to prove that thing, which is the cereal was good for us. I mean,
But that's
all the
not the
money.
way science. But that's not the way science works.
But that's the way it worked in that science. That was that science, and that's the way it worked.
Which
That
again,
really can't be denied.
which again was industrial scientists promoting a product with the government. They were basically paying off the government.
Right. Fair enough. But it still happened. I mean, scientists right now they make money from the government. I mean, that's where a lot of their money comes from. I don't know, that can't be denied. I love science. Don't miss it. I love science. I think science is a great thing. They learn a lot of things. They teach us a lot. There's a whole lot of truth in science. And I don't necessarily think that they're crooked or anything like that. But again, when you're taught evolution from a child, you're not going to change from that very easily. You're just not. That's the way you're going to look at all the information is from the evolution standpoint. So that's where I was going with that. I don't know. Did I explain that? Make any sense?
No, you can keep going. I'm trying to process it right now.
Well, okay. So let's move on to this. Okay. So you talk about coal, for instance, and the way coal is made is it has to be buried. It's whatever you think it's made out of. What is coal made out of? Maybe you should say that first.
Coal? Well,
Yeah. And how?
we have different coal beds around the world.
Mhm.
They were made during periods which were both very similar. I shouldn't say both, but two of the major coal beds, that we find around the world. There's the Carboniferous, and I believe there's the Devonian. And both of these were made during basically hothouse periods where you have a lot of biological production in hot, swampy areas. But that's not saying that, all coal comes from swamps. There are certain reasons why you have coal beds during the Carboniferous that are, currently their size is, hundreds of feet thick. Why do you have such a buildup of so much organic material over, a certain amount of time? Is kind of a question. And how can that be explained by a worldwide flood would be another one, because that's where what you would come from, right? Is that somehow they're explained by a worldwide flood. And why do we have these two separate major coal deposition times happening so many hundreds of millions of years apart? But one thing that I was bringing up over and over again on Twitter is the fact that in the Carboniferous coal beds, the trees you have, and I hate using air quotes, but I have to, the trees you have in the Carboniferous are not angiosperms. They're not the flowering plants that we have today. The trees that you had at that point were mainly I can't remember if it's a family or I know it's not a genera, an order, but they're called lycopods. And basically the only thing that we have today that is a lycopod is something called club moss, and those club mosses don't grow beyond, a few dozen centimeters off the ground. They're usually crawling, spreading things with rhizomes underneath. In those same coal beds, we find fossil assemblages of other things besides plants. We find some early animals, we find other things. One thing we never find is any animals that exist today, like no species that exist today. We might find, some huge dragonflies and large centipedes and millipedes, which have been popularized, especially by creationists, saying that's because there was a higher oxygen content in the air, which was true. But we don't find any, mammals. We don't find any amphibians that we recognize today. We do find amphibians, but we don't find anything in the tetrapods basically beyond amphibians during the Carboniferous. There are no reptiles, there are no birds, there are no mammals. The amphibians that we do find, again, are extremely different from today. You wouldn't recognize them. You would say, actually, they look kind of more like a reptile in some way, because they were kind of like alligator shaped, if you want to put it that way, based off their skeletal structure. So that was, I think, my point in bringing that up. And, again, there are many reasons why the coal beds grew so big during the Carboniferous, especially because you didn't have a certain fungal groups that would break down lignin. And so basically you had year after year of these swamps building up detritus organic matter, which you find happening in Florida today, the same thing. It doesn't have to be in an anoxic environment. It's basically just the weight of it pressing it down, or subduction areas where the ground slowly subsides in the swampy areas. So basically you just get the built up, of organic material, and then it takes heat and pressure to turn them into coal. And there's different types of coal.
So what
There's all these different types of coal based off of how it was formed and the time period it comes from.
so you're suggesting that you had these, whatever, these trees that were alive back then that fell down in these swampy areas, or sometimes not swampy areas.
And it's not
And
just trees, it's basically all organic life. I
okay,
just use trees because I like to point out the fact that the trees that existed during that point are, the only plants that exist today are club mosses. They're even closely related to them.
okay, yeah, it's I know I keep having to go down rabbit holes, but Kurt Wise said that he thought that the trees had really thick bark. There was a different kind of tree, he said. So
I hope that you would be able to point out more something specific than I think he said this. And what does bark have to do with anything? Because we find whole fossilized forests in coal formations. It's not just the bark. So bark really
well,
doesn't enter into it unless you're going back to his idea that somehow Mount St. Helens was analogous with coal making and why we have these huge coal beds. And
well,
that's why I point out, the hucksterism of it. He's trying to sell this and how, these ideas are internally consistent and self-refuting. Him trying to say that Mount St. Helens is somehow analogous with Carboniferous and Devonian coal beds is
I
just
don't think
laughable.
I don't think he
Well,
said that.
but I think he has actually. That's why you bring up the bark on the trees because he's going back to Mount St. Helens. That's the whole idea that came
Well,
up after
okay.
Mount St. Helens, and saying that
So what,
this could be a way that coal was rapidly formed. I understand these creationist arguments very well because I've been studying them for like 20 years. But you know, that's
but I'm
one
not
thing
sure
they
you
say,
explained it.
and that's where bark comes into it.
But I'm not sure you explained it the way that. So according to creationists, how does bark enter into this then? Because you haven't explained it yet the way I understand.
Because of Mount St. Helens and the bark came off the trees floated in Spirit Lake, the bark sank to the bottom. That's the
Okay.
creationist explanation for coal, basically, using the analogy of Mount St. Helens and the Spirit Lake and the eruption in 1980.
Okay. So what they're saying is, and they look, and if you, I don't think you've seen this new one that he has out, and it's called "What Happened When Mount St. Helens Erupted." That's a brand new one he just put out. And so when you look at Mount St. Helens and all the evidence of what happened afterwards, a lot of that looks like Noah's flood, for
No, it doesn't.
instance.
Not at all.
Well, that's what you're saying.
I
That's
mean,
what he.
okay, I no,
Yeah, that is.
I'm not even saying that. Again, I grew up there. I lived there. I went to Mount St. Helens before and after it erupted. I've hiked there many a times. I've been to the lava tubes called the Ape Caves on the south side. I used to actually take classes from my college there because I was the leader of an outdoor exploration group. I know the area very well. Okay, I'll go over a few things that creationist claims about Mount St.
Well,
Helens because they're really easy to
you
refute.
might
The first one being that there's all these layers and what they call like the Little Grand Canyon at Mount St. Helens. All of these layers are not sedimentary layers. They are layers of compressed ash, tuft, tephra, basically volcanic rock. They're not sedimentary layers. They are not lithified. They have not been turned to rock. So it doesn't matter that a volcanic eruption laid down multiple layers. We expect that to happen because of the lahar flows, because of the pyroclastic flows. We expect that to happen. We know it happens, and it's not in any way analogous to, the Grand Canyon, because that's what they try to compare it to. Going to something again. We just talked about coal and bark and Spirit Lake. I'm surprised that even comes up anymore. And those are really the two main arguments that you hear about Mount St. Helens. Of course, there's also the idea that the radiometric, dating of the lava that was coming out of the lava dome, dated to be billions of years old. I believe that was Steve Austin. And of course, he basically just tried to lie to the people about the samples he was giving them to be dated. So, and they weren't separated properly, so you didn't get all the xenoliths out, basically the foreign pieces of rock that came up through the lava pipe. There's also the fact that, this lava, that's coming out of the ground isn't molten lava. It's not what you like see at Kilauea with the Paholi flows, the red flowing lava. The lava that's coming out of Mount St. Helens basically looks like huge trunks of rock that just roll. They aren't even glowing hot. It's a different type of lava altogether. And of course, that's because it takes so long to get out of the ground. It takes thousands of years just to come from near the magma chamber to the surface. I could go over a lot more about Mount St. Helens because again, I think I even on Twitter, I think he showed you photos of me gathering ash during a volcanic eruption when I was in third grade. I understand this topic extremely well. So anything that you want to point out from Kurt Wise's video, I would love to discuss, but I probably went over the main three ones that he was probably presenting to begin with, without even watching the video.
Well, but again, when you look at criteria a certain way, that's the answer you're going to get.
No, that's just the fact. It's not analogous to the Grand Canyon.
It's a fact.
The layers are not sedimentary layers. They are ash layers that are formed by known processes, which we see observed happening all over the earth at a whole different types of volcanoes. The fact that you have a washout after a dam was formed because of melting glaciers on a mountain. It's not surprising that you get a washout and then you can see these layers of ash and again, tephra and pumice and other things that were laid down. We expect it to be there, but in no way is it analogous with the Grand Canyon because that's lithified rock. And lithified rock doesn't happen in a decade or less, which is when that little Grand Canyon at Mount St. Helens washed out. So it's not analogous. It's not looking at evidence through a lens. It's not your worldview. It's just a fact that it has nothing to do with the layers at Mount St. Helens have nothing to do with the layers in Grand Canyon, which they always claim they do.
Okay.
It's not. It has nothing to do with a worldview. It has nothing to do with One Direction, the boy band in Britain. It has everything to do with the fact that that's what happens, and we observe it happening in other places. That's that repeatable thing that you're asking about, right? It's been repeatable. We've seen volcanic eruptions at other places that have the same exact thing happen that happened in Mount St. Helens, but it has nothing to do with showing evidence the Grand Canyon was formed by a volcanic eruption, I guess. I don't know.
I got it. I got your point real well. So the conclusion I need to come to from what you just said is that creation scientists are hucksters, and evolution scientists, they're doing it out of the kindness of their heart. They're not getting paid like hucksters are that are creation scientists.
Well, again,
that's what you said.
When you say evolution scientists, you are basically saying that about every scientist in the world, pretty much.
Well, okay. So that's what you're saying
scientists
about
that study chemistry, scientists that study physics, scientists that study evolutionary biology, scientists that study, geology. They are all evolution scientists.
So are you saying that every evolution scientist is a huckster?
No, I'm asking. No, I'm saying that pretty much every creation scientist out there, especially young creation scientists, they're definitely hucksters. Yeah, they are trying to make money off of this. They are building creation museums. As far as evolution scientists, which you seem to group as pretty much all physicists, pretty much all chemists, pretty much all geologists, pretty much all ecologists, pretty much all biologists, and not even talking specifically about those studying genetics and evolutionary biology and paleontology. The whole world is an evolution scientist to you, as long as they don't accept the hucksterism of young earth creationism.
No, what I'm saying, I don't need to repeat myself again. What I'm saying is, when you look at criteria from One Direction, that's your answer. You come up with that answer.
But again, we're not. That's why you have the consilience of disparate information. You have all these different fields working independently, using different evidence, but they're coming to a very similar, if not same, conclusion.
Same evidence, come to a different conclusion. In fact, a lot of those things you just said from this new video that Kurt Wise just put out, he agrees with almost everything you just said. I mean, he's got the same criteria, but he comes up with a different answer to it. So
based off of theology and not science. Based off of theology and not science.
It's still science, because he's looking at it from a scientific point of view. He's
looking at it from a theological point of view, trying to prove creationism.
He's not trying to.
He's not looking at it from a scientific point of view.
He's proving creation. He's not trying to.
How is he proving
It's not,
creationism?
I, not, not,
What is
not so sure.
one thing that you think is the best piece of evidence from the video that you saw? Because it must have stuck out.
Okay, well, let me finish the thing about the coal, for instance. So I
Being
guess there's
from
a science
bark. Wait a
from
second.
the
Before you get into coal,
from
I
the
just want
bark.
to make sure because he's talking about Mount St. Helens. Your claim, or Kurt Wise's claim, the claim that you're going to repeat, is that somehow the bark from the trees that were submerged during the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980 in Spirit Lake, that bark sank to the bottom while the trees stayed on the top, and somehow that bark is evidence for the creation of coal beds that we see around the earth, and it proves the Noachian flood happened 4,400 years ago.
Yes.
Okay, that's the claim. What is
How?
you?
Do you want to know how it
That's
does it?
that's the
Do you
claim. What
know
is the
how?
evidence? And again, I know the argument much better than you do because it's an old argument. It's been refuted many times. So that's the claim. That's the claim. What is the evidence that he has to support that claim?
All right, are you ready for this?
Oh yeah.
All right.
Did God do
So,
it? Right?
so, um,
Done, says God. Now it's coal.
so, so here's the evidence the way I see it, Cipher. So, the so you actually explained it very well. Okay, so they had a scientist go back like in 1985, and he went with him. Kurt Wise did when he was younger, and they this guy, I guess he dove down into that 38-degree water down into the and looked to see what was down there, and he found um,
Bark.
tree bark. He found tree bark,
Yeah. Yep.
and the trees were still floating. So the trees would float.
Yeah, which
They
I
thought,
said, yeah, the trees are floating, the bark sank. Yeah.
and he thinks the trees will float for 75 years. That's the way to do it. In fact, I do
Oh,
know
they'll
that
float.
because
No, yeah, they'll float longer than that probably.
yeah, exactly. And so they used to use back. I'm going down the rabbit hole. I say it, but they use rivers to move logs way back in the logging years, back in the 1800s and all that, just because it was so easy and they floated. So, but at any rate,
And they
so
didn't have roads between towns, so it's the only way they could do it anyways. But
there you
yeah,
go.
yeah.
But it
Yeah,
worked.
I taught
So
social. I
but
teach
eventually
social
it
studies
worked.
as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, it worked. So um, so then you have these different volcanoes that were going on during Noah's flood. And I understand it's way over all the mountains and everything at the time, and the mountains at those times probably weren't very tall. And then so you have all this bark or whatever, and different things. I mean, there's things that fall in there too, like there's different animals that fall into it. There's different kind of things that fall into that area, and they would get buried and they would get suffocated under volcanoes that would put out these different kinds of sandstone and different kinds of things, and they would crush it and get rid of the oxygen, which you need to have to cause coal to happen. Because
No, you
so
don't.
if
No,
that
you
happened the
don't.
way you said, first of all,
Mm-mm.
if it happened the way you said, and if those kind of things floated during Noah's flood, there were probably currents going on. So that would have made these coal, or the bark, to float into areas along the currents and then drop to the bottom in areas that are as thick as what'd you say, 100 feet thick and 200 miles long. So if you had these, I mean, I can see a current, okay, and causing the bark to go within that current, and then it finally gets to a certain point, then it drops down, and then here comes another one of during Noah's flood. It's the water's still high. These different kinds of sandstone or whatever kind of volcanoes underwater would happen to bury it and get rid of all the oxygen, which allowed it to become coal. But the way you're saying it, in my opinion, if you have a swamp, swamps have oxygen in them because that's water. That's regular old water that we still have today. And what is water? H2O. That's oxygen is
But
in
it's not
it's
free
in hydrogen.
oxygen, and again, we find this process happening in Florida right now with the swamps. You
How
basically
deep?
have all of this. How deep? Well, we're not saying that Florida is analogous to the Carboniferous or the Devonian swamps, but again, we have these swamps that basically, and you have peat areas where it basically vegetation just keeps getting laid down, it keeps getting submerged, it becomes anoxic when it's submerged, and part of that is due to chemical processes such as the fact that decaying vegetation like that makes the water acidic. But it also has to do with the fact that you just have layer upon layer upon layer of vegetation being built up, and there's just not enough oxygen getting from the surface to decay it. Free oxygen in water, I don't know where you're going with that because water is bound together, H2O. It's not like oxygen is free to cause decay. Another interesting thing you said though,
Water causes.
you
Well,
know,
water
is you started out by basically saying that this had somehow to do with volcanoes. That's why Kurt Wise is talking about Mount St. Helens, which would mean that, you know, in these coal beds that we find worldwide that are hundreds of feet thick, I guess we should find a bunch of volcanic ash and volcanic evidence inside of those coal beds, which we don't, you know. So another point, and this is again going to why, you know, these individual points in creationism are self-refuting and internally inconsistent. You know, going to another thing, the coal beds that we have worldwide, it's been estimated that that would be like, you know, thousands of Earth's worth of vegetation to cause those coal beds, especially the ones in the Carboniferous. You know, not just one Earth would do it. It would have to be thousands of Earth's worth of vegetation to cause that. But, you know, the reason it isn't, of course, is because it took tens of millions of years for these coal beds to be laid down. It wasn't just 1 year long flood that caused all the bark to come off. You know, and, you know, this is getting back to the fact that according to your flood claim, the Earth was pretty much flat. It was one continent, which they claim is what we see as Pangea, which is why you have certain spreading areas still happening. But that this one Earth didn't have volcanoes until, now you're saying during the flood, I guess? But, you know, then the continents, spread apart, and then we have new volcanoes laid on the flood sediments afterwards. Again, this is, why it's internally consistent and self-refuting. You're making all these claims that don't even help each other out. And then you're trying to claim all the things you made were claims, they were not evidence. You're trying to claim somehow this explains coal beds because we see something at Mount St. Helens that doesn't even explain coal beds.
Sure does.
I don't even see the connection. No, it doesn't. The Mount St. Helens eruption does not explain coal beds. It just explains that, it just explains that when you have a volcanic eruption and you have a bunch of trees that land in a lake because of the volcanic eruption, you have bark that sinks and the trees float.
Okay, and that's
that you can't go beyond that. That's basically the evidence, and you cannot then say that is somehow evidence for all the coal beds that we see worldwide being caused by a flood. It's like you're saying that 1 plus apple equals rock. It doesn't even follow. The premise does not even follow through to a conclusion.
Okay, well, you can say that, but so I guess how would you explain what they're telling me is that when you have a coal bed, and there should be trees and things growing in the coal bed, right? Shouldn't there be different swamp things that grow? Don't trees grow in swamps and so on?
Well, I could bring up the Devonian coal bed found in Germany that has upright standing trees in it with roots intact and everything.
Exactly. So where are the roots at?
The roots are intact and everything.
Are they?
Yeah. Or we could talk about something like Specimen Ridge in Yellowstone National Park area. And Yellowstone Ridge is basically, a couple dozen fossilized forests on top of one another because of volcanic eruptions. They didn't make coal. They made fossilized, basically, forests. And there's over 24 of them. And we know how long they happened, over tens of millions of years because of radiometric dating. They have intact root systems. I mean, Where were you going with the roots?
Well, you would think you'd have roots that are underneath
The
the coal
soil,
beds.
the volcanic
Mhm.
layers? Well, no, they wouldn't
Well,
be underneath the coal beds. They would be in the coal beds, and we do have that.
why
The
wouldn't they be under?
Devonian fossil forest. I'm sorry. Coal is a fossil. The Devonian fossil forest, I believe, found in Germany. Boy, that was almost a decade ago. Is a perfect example of that. The trees are still there with their roots spread out because there wasn't a lot of decay going on. So you find that. You find that in other areas. I mean, you just don't find it in coal. You find it in paleosoils, basically fossilized soil areas. You find fossilized plants with the complete root systems. That's pretty common. It's not like a amazing discovery. It happens on a regular basis.
So you're saying
It's
that
again not coal. It happens. It happens in coal, but it also happens just in regular fossil formations.
okay. Well, that's not what they say. Not the creationists don't say what you're saying.
No, I know because they're hucksters and
Okay.
charlatans,
All right.
and they're trying to
Well,
make money,
you can make that
and they're
claim.
confusing theology with science because it makes them, it makes them basically icons and idols is what it makes them.
Oh, that's pretty good. So yeah. So you're basically name calling what you're doing.
No, no, I think I'm pointing out facts. I mean, here's the interesting thing about these facts is that I'm specifically talking about young Earth creationists because that's where you're coming from.
Hmm.
Old Earth creationists, theistic creationists, basically Christians who accept evolutionary biology, the age of the Earth being what it is, they call these people charlatans, hucksters, and con artists as well. It's not just me. There's a great article by Old Earth Ministries that basically says young Earth creationism is a cult. You know, and this has been said for a long time. This goes back to the creation of young Earth creationism by you know Whitcomb and Morris via George McCready Price via the Seventh Day Adventist founder Ellen White. They were all called cultists by people of their time, not just the scientists, by other religious people. Um, and the other thing that I haven't even brought up yet, but I think kind of goes along with part of the start of our conversation, is the fact that when we're talking about the worldwide scientific community, it's not just Christians; it's people from every faith and from people who don't have faith. They're not using their theological understanding of the world to to prove evolution. Also, they're basically saying that a theological story has nothing to do with their science because even though they could be from a different faith or the same faith as you, they're saying that this is just science. And it's also interesting that you were coming to it from basically what is basically a Protestant view of Christianity, young Earth creationism. It really is. The Catholics don't accept it. Overall majority of them don't accept it. So it's again this theological concept that attacks science so that people can basically build churches and make money. Their churches are called like the Creation Museum, the Ark Park in Kentucky, and places like that, and places online. I think one thing that when I have encountered Christians who teach science, they always laugh at young Earth creationism. One of my last classes I took, I moved back down to Portland, Oregon. I decided to take one more college course. I didn't actually even need the credits. I just wanted to take it because I went back and saw my old college, the college that I transferred from to, the college that I went to up in the Seattle area. And when I went back, I took a biology course because I had finished early and I moved back. The fall courses were still going on, so I took a fall course. It was like, why not? You know, and it was a biology course mainly on vertebrate anatomy, and the person who was the professor was a Christian, and we got into discussions about creationism, and he just didn't understand it at all. Young Earth creationism, right? He would say he's a creationist, but he would say he's something like a theistic evolutionist, or an evolutionary creationist. Basically, someone who says that the Earth is billions of years old. Evolution happened. It's just that God did it that way. Noah's flood. No, that's just an allegory of some sort. It's teaching us a lesson. And he never, whenever a conversation like that came up before in class, he would kind of like choke it off and say, "We're not discussing this. We're doing science." A student brought up something to me, I was a student in class as well, about creationism, and I just told him outright, I just don't accept it. And he knew that his professor was a Christian, and he asked him, he's like, "Well, since you're talking to him about it, I'll tell you what I told me, the professor. I don't accept it because I'm doing science right now. When I go to church, I'm going to accept he was an evangelical Christian. When I go to church, I accept the theological understanding of these events. I don't say that they are scientific events. I don't say that the creation was a scientific event. I don't say that the story of Noah's flood was a scientific event. They are theological lessons for us to learn about our interactions with our deity." Of course, he wouldn't say deity; he would say with God. But you get the meaning of this.
Sure.
So the point being is that your theological representation here, this creationism that we are discussing, and trying to basically say that the Noachian flood did happen at this time period around 4,400 years ago. It explains what we see around us. That is not scientific, and even other creationists say it's not scientific, and of course other scientists worldwide who are not Christians, of course, would say it's not scientific. It's theology.
Okay. Now, you know that I can find scientists that would say the same thing you just said in the opposite way, right?
That's an argument from authority. I wish you would. But instead of finding scientists, I want you to use their arguments. I want you to understand what they're trying to say. I don't care what, I'm not going to name drop. I'm not going to say, "Oh, I could find another scientist." Doesn't matter. It doesn't pertain to our discussion at all. What would help out our discussion is discussing the actual evidence and ideas behind them.
Okay. But still, again, you don't believe some of the evidence that I tell you.
I don't think it's evidence. I don't think that you've actually presented evidence. You have made claims.
Okay. Well,
You've claimed that something happened, so Noachian flood. Something happened, so evolution didn't happen. That's a claim. You need to actually support that in some way. I think that's the important part that's missing here. You can't just say something. You can't just point to an authority. This guy says this. You have to explain why you think that happened. And then when you say something like bark
I did
at Mount St. Helens, I can point out how the claims that are being made there are just totally impossible. They don't even make sense on the face of them.
Actually, they make common sense to me when you say it.
So you're saying, but again, what you were saying is that volcanoes erupted worldwide during the flood, and all of this bark gathered in spots only in certain areas.
Right. Exactly.
And that bark is hundreds of feet thick, which could only happen if you had thousands of Earth's worth of vegetation. And, again, they gathered at some place without any reason or rhyme. You haven't explained how that happened. That was a claim, not evidence. The amount of vegetation that we would have far exceeds thousands of Earth's worth. You're saying that there's going to be no volcanic ash in these coal beds when all of these volcanoes are erupting worldwide to cause this, because somehow what happened at Mount St. Helens is analogous to the Carboniferous and Devonian coal beds. So no, these are all claims that you're making. They all don't match up with one another. In fact, they refute one another. So it's not conciliant. Whereas
Okay.
when you're talking about how we currently understand through evolution, physics, geology, plate tectonics, paleontology, how coal beds actually formed, and it's all consistent, even though it's using different fields of evidence from different fields of science, different data from different fields of science. You know, no, it doesn't make any sense. And it again, it's claims without evidence, and they are self-refuting and internally inconsistent. One claim that you make refutes another claim that you make. So it doesn't seem to add all up, and I'm sorry if I seem frustrated, but it kind of is frustrating. Um, it's frustrating that you think that Kurt Wise is somehow an authority on this, and that he should have some kind of special precedence over people who have been studying this for hundreds of years worldwide, independent of trying to prove anything, but they all come to similar answers that support it happening over long periods of time. And sometimes that evidence leads us to actually support the thing that you seem to not like the most about science, which is evolution. Because of your theology again, because of your religious background. It doesn't seem to have to do anything with science. It has to do with the fact that you want to make sure that, this Noah's flood did happen because that means the Bible is literally true. It's historical. It's a historical document that actually is like reading, the history of any event, of World War II. This happened, this happened, this happened. And that's how we know that, the Battle of the Bulge happened, or, a certain fight during the Civil War, because we had all these eyewitness accounts of it. And that's what the Bible is to you. It's a series of eyewitness accounts. That's literal history. And that seems to be more important to you than science.
Okay. So I think that it wouldn't matter what I said to you, you would not believe it. If I could take
No,
you back,
I'm like I said, I'm fully open to any evidence.
your movie.
In
No,
fact,
I
I've
don't think
asked
you're
you
wrong.
for it, and then when I explain what you showed me is just these independent claims that don't help each other out,
They do help each other out, though.
but
Logically,
they
they
don't.
do. Well,
But I just
logically.
showed you how they don't.
Okay.
With coal,
Well,
with the example of coal, using the analogy of Mount St. Helens and how coal is formed, being analogous to the hundreds of feet found in the Carboniferous at some coal sites.
I find it hard to believe that a swamp could make it that big.
I'm sorry, you broke up there.
I find it hard to think that a swamp could make 200 feet
It wasn't
of
just
coal.
one swamp.
And
It
it's not
was
only,
like, and it happened over hundreds of millions of years. Well, I'm sorry, tens of millions of years.
okay, well, whatever the number is. So, but when things break down, they're not going to break down in 200-foot thick of the same stuff, because
It
they're
just keeps
going
getting
to,
added upon. I mean,
no,
you
it
can go
doesn't.
right now. I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example. You can go right now to the Pacific Northwest and some areas around Mount Rainier, around other areas in the Cascade Mountain Range, and you will find in some areas about 10 feet of what's called duff. And duff is basically all the pine needles, all the twigs that have broken off from these old growth forests over thousands of years. You can find about 10 feet of it. It hasn't broke down unless a
Yeah,
fire
so
comes through and
they're gonna,
wipes it out.
so how are they going to turn into coal? Are
I,
they turning into
I
coal
didn't say
now?
that. I didn't say they would. I'm just saying that stuff like that adds up over time. You have areas. So they have areas in the highlands of the United Kingdom, of the British Isles, you have areas in the highlands where you have peat that is added up over time, and they will dig it up and use it for a source of cooking fuel, right? The peat mines. I'm not saying that's going to turn to coal either. I'm just saying it's possible for these layers to add up under certain conditions. White Cliffs of Dover. White Cliffs of Dover are hundreds of trillions, thousands, millions of trillions of little microfossil shells that add up over a long period of time, not during a Noachian flood like creationists claim. Because it couldn't happen anyway during a flood, because they only occur in very, pure water under certain conditions. And if it happened during a flood, instead of the White Cliffs of Dover, it would be, the Cliffs of Dover that are white, but they've got a bunch of mud mixed in, I guess. So.
Okay. Well, I think it's interesting that everything that could have happened in a hurry. Now, then you can say, well, that happened in 10,000 years or a billion. You can just throw.
But you're saying that happened in less than a year.
Yeah. So that's just as believable on its face as what you just said. Because if you think something didn't happen quick enough, then then 10,000 years. 10 million years. I mean, you can come up with anything you want.
We know from certain chemical, physical, geological processes that these did happen over a certain amount of time.
Okay.
Especially chemical and physical properties.
And again, those can be refuted in some cases. So.
But you'd have to bring up a specific example that we could discuss.
Okay. Now I forgot what I was going to say.
No, sorry.
That's all right. Well, I don't know. I guess there's just a lot of areas where you can believe it both ways. I mean, it's still. I mean, I don't think you've convinced me of anything that couldn't have gone both ways. I mean, just like the scientists. I mean, science can be wrong and can be wrong for a long time, and just when you look at things from a different standpoint, from a different viewpoint, you see it differently. So I said that already about 5 times. I don't want to say it again, but yeah. So I don't know. I know he wants to quit in an hour and a half, and I'd love to do this again next week. But do you want to keep it going, or?
No, yeah, no. I hope you don't find me rude or that I'm stepping over you too much. I'm not trying to be. I'm just trying to kind of really boil down the points that I hear you saying. And I think that's what's important about these type of discussions is, looking at the reason that we are saying certain things is just as important as the facts that we are trying to present. Yeah.
Sure.
I would enjoy doing this next week as well.
Yeah, but again, I mean, when you're looking at things from a certain standpoint, that's what you're going to come up with. I mean, just again, that same example with the cereal companies. For 40, 50 years, that's all they could talk about was how cereal was going to be good for you. Now they find out, well, it's not.
That's why, and that's why you had doctors in newspapers and magazines telling people to smoke.
Exactly. So the point is that scientists don't always have the right answer. I mean, if you can't see that, I don't know. I mean, I think it's obvious. So it's just that, what lens are you looking through?
Okay. If I can interrupt real quick, as you just said, Craig, we're on about an hour and a half. So I would really like to wrap it up here. As for next week, I did want to do this off air. I can do it here as well. We have Professor Flynn in the chat as well, who you may have seen in the Twitter thread. And he's a co-host on my channel. And so instead of continuing this next week, I would like to take a break from this one and maybe have you on our channel talking to us next week, which would be talking about your beliefs, not about the science. because that's a part that we're as a channel interested in hearing about. Would you be up for that?
You talking to me?
Yes.
Did you just say that you wanted to talk about beliefs and not science?
Yes. Specifically about your Christian beliefs.
Oh, you
The
wanna talk
shows
about
that we
my
do,
Christian belief.
the shows that we do, we basically have just one question: what do you believe, and why do you believe it? And that would be what the conversation would be about.
Oh, I see. Okay, so you want to get away from this conversation of today then?
No.
Yeah.
No, we can continue
Sure.
that, but I would like to have you. So this is a show we provide for other people, but we do have our own shows as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to have you on that particular show, if you were
Sure.
game.
I can do that.
Okay, and then we can, the week after that, we can continue this if both of you are up for it, because I'm still liking the conversation. I think it's cordial. I think it's benefiting for lots of people. So I'd be more than happy to host more conversations.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Love to do it.
Well,
I'm enjoying
then-
this actually.
by the way, I did also drop a link in the side chat because you mentioned Kurt Wise. We did a 4-part rebuttal. Those are 2-hour-long shows on Jackson Wheat's channel, where we specifically rebutted the claims that Kurt Wise makes. It was kind of a weird video because, for the most part, all he was talking about confirming how, as he calls it, the evolutionist standpoint is valid. So was kind of strange. He only got to the creationist part at the end of the video. But yeah, we did do that for people who want to check that out. The link is in the private chat. I've also linked to.
So there's about 8 hours.
Say again?
I'm sorry, so you're saying there's about 8 hours worth of videos to look at?
Yes. Well, we play the video and then we pause it when we want to respond to something that is said on screen. This was
sure.
a presentation done by, I think, by Answers in Genesis, if I'm correct. And for people who are watching and want to stay on until the show actually ends, you'll get forwarded to Jackson Wheat's channel, where we will have a chat with Donald Prothero, which also should be a very interesting conversation. And I wanted to thank you, gentlemen, for coming on for a second time. I really enjoyed the conversation. I enjoyed the fact that it is so cordial and it never gets heated. So that's a good thing, at least in my book. And I want to thank everyone in the chat who's showed up and responded. Thanks all for dropping by. Don't forget to hit the like button. And then we will see you all next week. Any last words? I'll hand it to you, Craig, first.
Well, I think we didn't get to a whole lot of different things that we discussed last week a little bit. Like, I wanted to discuss the cloning, so maybe we can get into that a little bit. And also so why is it that we cannot make any kind of living organism with our scientists that know so much? So I think those are some things that, and also I would like to discuss the Grand Canyon too. That to me, it's obvious that there's only one thing that could have caused the Grand Canyon was the receding waters from Noah's flood. I mean, it's too big of a canyon to have happened in a small way. It had to be really, really big amount of water to cause that. And another one that I heard recently on a creation channel was that there's many of these kind of Grand Canyons around, but they're covered with foliage, so you can't see them. But since the Grand Canyon's in a desert, they're easily seen. So there's a lot of things I like to discuss about that, so which we didn't get to today.
Well, I would suggest take down the notes, and then for next time, we can list those topics, and we can talk about that. Scipher,
Sure.
any last words?
You brought up the chat before. I never keep track of it, but I'm sorry that I haven't. I was just kind of quickly scrolling through it myself, and I'll have to back up the video and see what people were talking about at a certain time. But I need to do that. I need to keep up with the chat and kind of interact more with what some people are saying, because I think that might kind of add some different things to the conversation as well.
Okay, I did also link.
Thanks, Craig, and thank you, Peter.
Yeah, I did also link to your channel. So people who aren't aware that you actually have a channel, go over there and subscribe, because there is new stuff coming there as well. Okay, I want to thank everyone for dropping by, and then we'll see you all next week. Catch you later.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you.